there again. Also, Project Cure is on October 5th. See me if you want to join us. And the communication meeting is today, right after this meeting with Ian. So you can send a chat to Ian or let me know, we'll get you hooked into that. So with that, I ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, with that, please be seated. Enjoy your lunch if you're in the room. And I'd like to invite Rick Bowman, president of Procore Images, who is doing our inspirational moment via Zoom.
Oh, there we go. Now can you hear me? Hello?
Share, you gotta
Okay.
share your Zoom.
We all have many stressful challenges going through our minds currently, and what makes it even more challenging is a thing called negativity bias. I'd like to reference an article from Forbes written by William Arruda. I will paraphrase. In the field of psychology, negativity bias is defined as that notion that even when of equal intensity, things of a more negative have a greater effect on one's psychological state than does neutral or positive things. These can be unpleasant thoughts, emotions, bad social interactions, and harmful or traumatic events. So one way to override that primal alarm, which does us much more harm than good, is to drown it out with things that are positive, heartwarming, and encouraging. One study suggests we need at least 5 times as much positive stimuli to counteract the negative. With all that we have to counteract currently, now is the time to fill your heart and mind with optimism and gratitude. Here's what I'm striving to do. When my thoughts become overwhelmed by COVID news, economic conditions, or a political climate, I try to turn my thoughts around by thinking of at least 3 to 5 reasons why I should be grateful. This can be gratitude for family, friends, Rotarians, and the fact that we still live in a great nation, even though we have our ups and downs. When anxiety levels rise, I encourage everyone to take a deep breath and remember what is good in this world. Isn't everybody enjoying the beautiful Colorado weather this time of year? Rotarians, let's try to emphasize the positive in our lives and minimize the negative. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. That was great. Next up, we have Troy Szymanski, partner and fund manager with Outpost Fund. He's our club secretary, and he will give us the secretary report.
Thank you, Debbie. First of all, it's really good to see you guys again, whether you're here at the Warwick or online via Zoom. First off, I want to thank all the guests for coming, whether you are here at the Warwick or online via Zoom. Birthdays. Join me in wishing a happy birthday to Kevin Neiman, Phil Godert, Rob Clinton, and Marlene Wilkins all this week. So send them a note. All right, finally, some announcements. A change to our Tuesday meeting email. Happy hour will continue tonight at 5:30, and instead we're canceling next Thursday's happy hour on October 8th. The Zoom link will be provided in our meeting recap email today. Family of Rotary. Marlene Wilkins' sister Marge suddenly passed away peacefully on Tuesday morning from colon cancer, surrounded by her loving family. If you would like to send a note of condolence, Marlene's contact information is in the meeting recap. Finally, a save the date for a virtual luncheon with Rotary International President Holger Knack, live from Germany on Sunday, November 1st at 1 p.m. This is in lieu of the district's annual Rotary International President Dinner and polio fundraiser. To encourage participation, the club is covering the cost for this event for all membership. So if you register directly through us, $25 of the $28 ticket cost will go to End Polio Now. Keep your eyes out for a formal registration email from our club, and it will not be coming from the district. Thank you very much. Debbie?
All right, thank you, Troy. Announcement that I want to share with you is about the Rotary office quiet period that we're having from October 5th through 16th. We have had a lot of change this year. Would you agree? Between coronavirus, Zoom, Peach Freeze, we have started up Quest 31. We've had to change the peach sale logistics. We had Darlene's retirement party, and we have had a lot going on. We are looking at dues and budgets and just how to manage in this really ever-changing environment. And I think as Rotarians, we have shown a lot of resilience. With that, we have really put a lot on the office. We have transitioned from 2 office staff to 1. So we are asking for Lauren to take some quiet time, help us with strategy, help us with some of those transition tasks around member videos to help us with some of our strategic plans, some of our next steps. If you have questions or needs, direct them to Jim Johnston. We'll put you in the right direction. Group around our office efficiency, come up with ways to do things that are faster, cheaper, and just really do the work that needs to happen that we've had to put on the back burner because of this ever-changing year we've had. So appreciate your support of that. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Amanda, who is on Zoom. That is
Thank you very much, President Debbie. And I know that all of us Rotarians, we are so grateful to you and your colleagues, the officers who have been working diligently in order to ensure that we all have good meetings and the Rotary functions as we want it to. I am going to be delighted to present to you my colleague and friend, Robert Hardaway. You have certainly noted his accomplishments. He is a respected teacher, a distinguished scholar, has been in the media a whole lot. And what you did not see in the meeting notice is that he has published several books of fiction. More important for all of us, he is a good man, a good Rotarian. Even when he and I don't agree on ideological grounds, and that can be often, I must tell you that we do not debate. We don't debate as you heard the debate on Tuesday night. We are civil, we can disagree, but we are not disagreeable. So I want to present to you and want you to welcome my dear friend, Robert Hardaway.
To take this off so that you can hear me a little better. I'm not going, let me introduce myself first by saying that I'm not going to be talking about this NPVIC thing on the ballot. I'll make a few comments. I'm mainly neutral on that. My main purpose here is to give you the results of my research and scholarship in the area of the law of the Electoral College. I first got introduced to it when I was at 15 at a school in Washington, D.C., high school. And we had a government class on Thursday nights, and we would have an issue that we would debate as we do today. And my protagonist on the other side, interestingly enough, was a person who got me interested in this whole topic. His name was Al Gore, and I understand he's still around. But that's how I got started, and ever since I've been dedicating most of my scholarship to this whole question of the Electoral College. I'm going to be really talking about mostly why we have an Electoral College. Many people don't really understand why we have it. So a good place to start might be going back to the year 1776, or rather the year 1776 up to the Constitutional Convention in 1787. A lot of us don't know much about that period of our history before we had a constitution, because we had presidents even before Washington, but there was really no country to speak of. It was 13 disparate colonies. It was sometimes called a firm league of friendship. And so, as Voltaire said about the phrase, the Holy Roman Empire, it wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, it wasn't an empire. There was not much of a league back in 1776. It wasn't very firm, and there was not much friendship. As a matter of fact, the colonies they had different interests. They were breaking apart. Pennsylvania and New York said, we're going to form our own amalgamation. They set up trade barriers. The smaller states didn't want to become part of any grand union. They had delegates to. Said, if any at this convention ever said anything about how there's not every state has an equal voice in the Congress, you leave automatically. Rhode Island said they smelled a rat, wouldn't even send anybody. And Madison was the one who tried to prevail upon George Washington to moderate. He tried to tell Washington, you got to come. And he was very reluctant. He said, it's not going to happen. We're not going to be able to form one union. There's just too many different disparate interests. The small states are absolutely adamant that we want equal representation in any Congress that is set up. The large states know it should be based on population. And even George Washington said, well, he made an excuse. He said, I really would like to, but I know it's not going to work out. It's a waste of time. And I'm going to go visit. I promised my friends at the Cincinnati, his old Revolutionary War buddies. I promised to be with them this summer. And at the last minute, Madison said, you got to come. Give it a shot. Maybe we can get something together. And so we had the Constitutional Convention, it was the middle of the summertime. Benjamin Franklin was the first to be there. He was pretty much at the local pubs waiting for the other people to dribble in. But there was a lot of disgruntlement, and even George Washington said, I just don't see any way we can create one nation. So what some of the delegates said is, I think, interesting when you look at the history. Delegate Bedford said that if every state equal rights, the small states will find, if we don't have equal suffrage in the Congress, we will find some foreign ally of more honor and justice that will take us by the hand and do us justice. The advisors to George III said, you know, they're going to be begging to come back into the UK. They're just falling apart. They're setting up trade barriers. They're breaking up. And they'll be back because there's no commerce. It's a wreck. They'll never form one nation. And that's why George Washington was very reluctant. He was finally persuaded, thank goodness for what we have today with the United States of America. And so they decided to do the easy questions first, relatively easy. The whole 3 branches of government with its checks and balances, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And that fairly breezed through. They didn't have a whole lot of disagreement about that. Alexander Hamilton thought the president should be elected for life, sort of like a king. Nobody thought much of that idea. at the time. And certainly today, I think somebody would be upset if the president was elected for life. But they saved for the very end, toward the ends of the summer, they saved for the very end the contentious issue. They were even almost afraid to bring it up because they know that they were very pessimistic that it would ever reach an agreement. And the small states were absolutely adamant. They said, we're not going to join a union unless we have equal suffrage in the Congress. And the large states say, no, we want it to be based on population. New York and Pennsylvania in particular said it had to be that way. And the small states said, well, fine, form your own country. You're already doing it. You're already forming an amalgamation. You're already putting up trade barriers and so on. So it looked like it was about to, as one of the delegates said, we were hanging by a thread. People just wanted to go home. There was no chance of us creating one nation. And then someone, I have not been able to determine who it was. I think it was Benjamin Franklin, but there's some other candidates, said, I've got an idea, a compromise that can create a country. Everyone said, well, let's hear it. And he said, we'll do both. We'll have a Congress with two houses, one based on population and one based on equal suffrage in the Senate. Now, the big states kind of bullied the little states, and they said, look, you can't have one state, one vote in the Senate. And the little states said, well, then we won't join. If you want to marginalize us, we should have equal rights, just like we did under the Articles of Confederation. And the compromise was then presented at the last minute as people were giving up. And these are the prongs of the compromise. Amazingly enough, this compromise, thank goodness for us being a nation today, this compromise had three prongs. I'll tell you what they are in a moment. But these three prongs are what brought this country together. And it passed by one vote. That's how close we came to breaking up to where we might be very well in the same situation as, say, South America. Because there just seemed to be no way to bring the country together, or the colonies, because that wasn't really a country. That was just 13 disparate colonies. Number one, there'll be two branches of the Congress. One will be based on population. The other one will be every state gets one vote. And to this day, people don't like that. They don't like that Wyoming in the Senate gets one vote, the same number of votes as California. And that's why when people talk about abolishing the Electoral College, they realize you really need to abolish the Senate first, because that's where you really don't have one person, one vote. The Wyoming voter who votes for their senator gets much more impact in legislation than in California. And that's still a bone of contention, and that's why some groups, some political groups say, yeah, you got to abolish abolish the Senate. The second prong was that every state's weight in a presidential election will be based on that equal suffrage in the Senate. Every state gets 2 electoral votes, regardless of their population, by virtue of having 2 senators. And that's why you're at Wyoming. It's 570 electoral votes. Wyoming has 3 over 570. Get your calculators and figure out what their weight is. And if you figure that out, if you abolish the Electoral College, which there's been over 700 attempts to do so, by the way, since 1787. They've all failed for the reasons I'll give you in a moment. If you figure that out, then you're basically taking away the equal suffrage in the Senate. And that's why so many people who understand that say, well, we got to abolish the Senate first. And the Green Party actually advocated that. But that was not, they needed more. The small states say, no, we need a guarantee. Because how do we know you won't give us equal suffrage in the Senate? Base our weight in elections, presidential elections, based on that equal suffrage in the Senate. And then you'll go through this constitutional amendment process that you put into the Constitution, and you'll take it away. So we're still leaving. We're still leaving. And then there's the last part of the compromise. Okay, we'll guarantee it. Well, how are you going to guarantee it? The last sentence of Article 5. And I talked to people in the streets, you know about the last sentence of Article 5? No, don't remember that. And I'm amazed that the people I talked to still think that they went into the voting booth and voted for Trump, or they voted for Hillary Clinton. No, you did not. You voted for some electors who claimed that they would vote for those people in the Electoral College. But then, like in the 2016 election in Colorado, 3 of them decided, I don't want to. 3 of the Hillary electors say, I want to vote for a Republican instead. So how do you count popular votes for electors who are pledged to one candidate but vote for another? There's no way to do it. And when you ask some of the NP, National Popular Vote Interstate Compact people, they just say, well, we would just not count votes for electors in that situation. Like in Alabama in 1960, you had a slate of electors who were not pledged to anybody. They went off to the Electoral College. 5 of them voted for Kennedy and 6 of them voted for Byrd. How do you count popular votes for an electoral slate? There's no way you can do it. That's why in 1960, the newspapers disagreed as to who won the so-called popular vote. There's no such thing under our system. Nope, the last sentence of Article 5 says, this is the one that really brought the country together. It was the guarantee to the smaller states. Not only will you have equal suffrage in the Senate, but your weight in presidential elections is guaranteed based on those 2 votes in the Senate. And it cannot be abrogated by the normal amendment process. Every state has to agree. And that's what has prevented these 720 attempts to abolish the Electoral College. That guarantee that the founding fathers put in there has prevented it. Back in 2007, and I have a few words about the MPVIC. I'll talk about those at the end if I have time. But the MPVIC people have said that we want our state to cast their votes for the popular votes in other states all around the country. But there are no popular votes for candidates. And I still know people who go into the voting booth and said, I voted for Trump. And I said, no, you didn't. You voted for a guy named Joe Blow who said he would vote for Trump. You voted for an elector who said she would vote for Hillary, but she didn't. There's no such thing as popular votes. And you can't take away that equal suffrage in the Senate, upon which every state's weight in the presidential elections is based, unless every state agrees. And that's why I call a lot of the noise we heard today about Electoral College abolishing it is what I call a little bit of political theater. It sounds good. The popular vote sounds so seductive. Well, I have in my book here, I've written a number of books, and you're free to take one. Just give $20 to the Rotary. That's all I ask. And I explain in the book what I'm going to try to explain in maybe 15, 20 minutes. Just one more comment on the MPVIC, and I'll get back to the Electoral College. This National Popular Vote Interstate Commerce Scheme, Interstate Commission Scheme, Popular Vote, was actually, this is the 3rd time this summer before last was introduced into the legislature. And I and a political science professor, Professor Riley, went to the Senate committee that was considering the legislation, and they were 10 to 1 in favor. They said, did this popular vote, it sounds so great. Yeah, why not? Why not? I said, give me 15 minutes. They gave me 20 minutes. At the end, they changed their vote to 10 to 1 against. Okay, it came back a few years later, and then it came back the last time, but this last summer before last, when I went down, there were hundreds of people, and they said, you can have 1 minute. I can't persuade anybody in 1 minute, so I will do my best. When I do the media interviews, they say, you got 3 minutes. Tell me why we shouldn't abolish the Electoral College. And I say, well, if you want a summary that quick in 3 minutes, let me just read you what John F. Kennedy said in 1956. It's one of his famous speeches, and I have the citation for it. And at that time, it was Republicans who wanted to get rid of the Electoral College because they thought it favored Democrats. Hey, California, New York, they can throw all their electoral votes to their candidate so that it favors Democrats. Republicans didn't like that. Everett Dirksen and some other Republicans said, we got to abolish it, because they thought somehow the Electoral College favored Democrats. So it changes. Who's for it, who's against it, changes from decade to decade. But Senator Kennedy, who was a senator at that time, I think in this paper I've passed it out, this summary, he really encapsulates why we have an Electoral College. He said, quote, direct election, which is this so-called popular vote election along the lines of Russia and France, they have this popular vote election scheme, would greatly increase the likelihood of a minority president. And by that, he didn't mean a minority president, he meant a president who was elected by a minority of the people. It would break down the federal system under which the states enter the Union. We just talked about that. He understood that. He understood that that's what created the United States of America. it would provide a system of checks and balances, and that's the key, checks and balances, that no area, so you don't want little enclaves ruling the rest of the country, or group shall obtain too much power. He foresaw, because remember, this is in the 1950s, and the South was pretty much segregationist. And the Electoral College prevents a situation where let's say you have overwhelming so-called popular support for a particular segregationist candidate down in the South, and because they have 90%, they managed to get a majority of the so-called popular votes around the country. And he said the Electoral College is designed to ensure that support for a president is not just deep in one enclave or one section, but has support over the whole country. And he understood that. What did JFK mean when he said it provides a system of checks and balances? And what did he mean when he said that it would greatly increase the likelihood of a minority president? I think he was very prescient, because if you look at the French election in 2017, they don't have an electoral college. And so you had 3 or 4 candidates. They had two major parties like we do, but people were upset about various things. And so in the popular vote election, so-called popular vote election, the 2 major parties lost by 2%. That left 2 parties left. An outlier named Macron that not many people knew about, and also an extreme right wing candidate, Le Pen. And so the voters in a so-called runoff. Now the runoff really creates illusions, because you figure that if you only have 2 people in the runoff, somebody has to get 50%. Isn't that democratic? Well, the people in France didn't think so. 65%, almost 2/3 of them, opposed Macron. They elected Macron. He got over 50% on the runoff, but 2/3 of the people were opposed to him. And they expressed their outrage for this Russian system, which we know is the national popular vote system, the French system, by casting a blank ballot. They were so outraged by this, what passed for democracy. And we don't realize how lucky we are to have an electoral college. We get spoiled. Over the last couple of 100 years, we expect to see the returns. Now we see them on television. And then we expect, okay, someone gets an overwhelming advantage in the Electoral College, like Kennedy did in 1960, even though, according to the New York Times and the Congressional Quarterly, he lost the popular vote. And what would have happened in 1960 if we'd had the Russian or the French system? We still wouldn't know where the president was. You think it was bad in the year 2000 when the electoral vote was close, that you had to have a recount in Florida with the appeals and all the trauma that caused? Multiply that by 50. And you get some idea of what would be involved in trying to do a recount of a popular vote system over the whole country. JFK quoted Madison. He said, "This government is not completely consolidated, nor is it completely federal. Who are the parties to it? The people, not the people comprising one great mass, but the people comprising 13 sovereignties. It's a federal republic. It is not just a sort of where the mass gives these popular votes. Today, we have an electoral system which gives both large and small states certain advantages that offset each other. The big states have a huge advantage. They have the option of casting all their electoral votes, this is called the unit vote system, to just one candidate. So that the candidate who wins California starts off with a huge number of electoral votes right off the bat. That's an advantage the large states have. But the small states have a little advantage, and some people don't like them having any advantage at all. They don't like that Wyoming gets 3 out of 570th representation when it comes to the weight in the presidential election system. They don't like that, and they want to abolish it. But you can't. But you always come up against this Article 5. You can't abolish that weight they have in presidential elections, which is based on the equal suffrage in the Senate, which is guaranteed under Article 5 that it can't be abrogated unless every state agrees. And then the comment, and he's made a number of comments. You can read I have the cite to the congressional record where he gave the speech. Direct election, remember he's fighting against Republicans who at that time thought it was to their disadvantage. So it's not a partisan thing, except you have to look at which decade you're talking about. Today, for some reason, people are convinced that it somehow helps Republicans. Back in 1960, they were convinced that it helped Democrats. And that's when I went to the last session down at the Capitol, most of them, their argument was there must be something wrong with the Electoral College. Elected somebody I didn't want, so there's got to be something wrong with it. Direct election, which is the Russian system, while purporting to be more democratic, would increase the power and encourage extremist splinter parties. And that's exactly what happened. It happened in France in 2017. Give you one example. Of course, I give a lot of examples in my book. In 1936, the socialists were polling between 10 and 15%. And looks like if we had a popular vote election, there probably would have split what was the Democratic vote into the socialists and the Democrats. And the Republicans probably would, I guess Hoover might have won in a so-called runoff. But you had the Electoral College, and the socialists realized 3 months, 4 months before the election, they realized we can't run as a separate party here. We're going to make an accommodation with the Democratic Party. And they merged, and by the election day, only 1% were supporting the socialists, and the Democrats were able to win the election. That's what the Electoral College does. It channels people into making compromises before the election. Contrast that with the countries that don't have an Electoral College. Look at Italy, where you have to have these after the election. You got 15 or 16 different parties, and then they try to reach an accommodation, and they're very unstable. Even in England, you get with just 3 parties, you still have unstable coalitions, which may or may not survive. They can be gone in one day if somebody defects. And then you get the negotiation after the election. That doesn't work. So the people sometimes ask, well, why do we actually have an Electoral College, though? I mean, the founding fathers said, part of our compromise was having a House based on population, having a Senate based on equal suffrage in the Senate. Why can't we just do it like in England and let the Parliament select the leader? Their Parliament is actually what I would call an Electoral College, because it works the same way. You elect members to Parliament, and then the members of the Parliament elect the leaders. Is that so horribly undemocratic? I don't know. So why didn't the founding fathers do that? Because of the balance of power, because of the checks and balances. They did not want the legislature to have both the legislative function and be responsible for electing the other branch of government, the executive branch. They said, we'll split that off. So in a way, you can look at Congress as being divided into 3 parts: the House, the Senate, and the Electoral College. They did not want the president, or in Article 1, to be beholden to the legislature. They wanted them to be equal branches of government. In UK, they just have 2 branches, really. They have the legislative and the judicial. The executive is so closely tied to the legislative. They can have a no confidence motion, and then the leader's gone. There's no checks and balances. There's no equal branch of government like we have in our system. Our system is really unique in that respect, and we've been spoiled by it for many hundreds of years. Well, I've got just I'd like to talk a little bit about the MPVIC. When I talked to the committee, I said, well, I'm not going to get into whether it's good or bad, or whether popular vote, whether the Russian system is good or bad. Some people think it's great. Some people think that even though the vote always gets split, just like it would have happened in 1936, it would have been split between the socialists and there's 4 or 5 other parties in there. There would have been a runoff. Of course, one thing about the MPVIC, though, is that there's no provision for a runoff. So if someone gets 3% of the vote and everyone else gets less, then that person is elected, because there's no even provision for a runoff under the MPVIC. But that's not what caused the members of that Senate committee back in 2007 to reconsider and change their vote from 10 to 1 in favor to 10 to 1 against. I'll give you the 3 things that I brought up. First of all, I told them about Article 5. And some of them say, well, I didn't even know about Article 5. Well, we all learned about it in 4th grade civics, but some of us have forgotten about it. We've forgotten about the grand compromise that created the United States of America. I said, the second thing is, you say in the MPVIC, you don't even use the word national popular vote in their manifesto. What they say is, we will tell our electors to vote for the person who got the most popular votes in other states. Well, except they don't say popular votes. They say candidates who are associated with these electors.
Electors to the candidate. Electors means they don't vote for the person they're pledged to.
And I said, how would you count 180,000 people who voted for Clinton electors? How would you count those? Would you count those as popular votes for the Republican whom they voted for in the
Because this is Thomas over Hillary, but
well, we have to leave that up to the courts. One answer I get is litigation. The other answer I get is we just wouldn't count them. I say, really? You wouldn't count the 180,000 votes that you can apportion to those 3 electors? You just wouldn't count them? And I said, you know, not counting them, isn't that kind of disenfranchisement? We don't like that word. Okay, all right, they don't like that word. But what can you do? There's no way to count them because there is no popular vote. You go look at the ballot next time you go in. You're not voting for a candidate. And it's amazing how many people, if you just go up to somebody in the street, did you vote for a presidential candidate? And they'll say, yeah. I said, nope, you did not. You may not have realized it. The other thing is with the recounts, how do you recount? Every state has their own trigger for a recount. So Colorado has a trigger if you're within a certain percentage. Other states have different triggers. And if someone overwhelmingly votes for a slate that is pledged to Hillary Clinton, and 60% voted for that state's going to say, well, under our law, we don't have to have a recount. We can't have a recount. It's not close enough. So any kind of a so-called popular vote election along the Russian lines, you wouldn't know who won the popular vote because you can't recount. There could be massive fraud, no recounts whatsoever. How can you have a national recount when only half the states are participating? The MPVIC manifesto, which I've read word for word, kind of slips by that and says, well, maybe, yeah, that's a problem, but maybe we could also propose federal legislation for a national recount. Well, fine, do that then. Do that. Then you can come back with your proposal for a national popular vote interstate compact. But do that first, so at least we have the recount. And actually, of all those 3 things that I brought up, caused them to switch their vote to 10-1 against, it was the recount one that really did them in. They had said, I'll have to think about what you're saying about Article 5. Yeah, where they have to think about that one. But recounts, when only half the states are recounting. What is the actual result of a popular vote election? As Kennedy said, and whatever you may think of as president, I happen to think he was one of our great presidents. I wrote my 8th grade thesis on him, and I actually went to the inauguration, went down on the bus. I was about 10 years old, and listened to his speech. I was sitting in a tree with my little camera, pointing at the president giving his speech, his inaugural speech. I think if I did that today, I'd probably have a SWAT team on me in no time, but he was absolutely amazing in his defense. It was I think it's one of the most eloquent speeches I've ever said. That's why there's attempts every time the demographics change, every decade or so. This is what's been going on ever since that one vote that created the United States of America, that grand compromise, that one compromise that brought a nation together. There's been attempts, mainly by the big states, to want to marginalize the small states. And they've had hearings every 10 years or so, depending on who they think's ox is being gored. There was one in the 1970s in which they invited people from all sectors of the country. Vernon Jordan, who was the head of the Urban League, he spoke on the interest of African Americans. And what he said was that if you abolish the Electoral College, you marginalize African Americans. Because today under the Electoral College, they are critical to the votes in New York or say California, where they can throw 58 electoral votes. But if you dilute their vote by putting them in a great mass like they do in Russia and France, then you're really marginalizing African Americans. And that really, I think, threw the balance in terms of the votes for the Republicans who were kind of ashamed, I think, to think that they were proposing something that would actually marginalize. And interestingly enough, you take polls, the polls change.
but African Americans in the at least the last poll I found in the 1980s opposed for the reason that their spokesman Vernon Jordan said, we do not want to be marginalized in elections. We want to be an important minority, even though we're only 12%. We don't want to be diluted. The question is also raised, well, let's say that every state agreed to abolish the Senate and to abolish the Electoral College, to undermine the whole federalist basis for our country. Let's say we did that. What would campaigns look like? Well, for one thing, where would you campaign? Would you go to Wyoming, where they get 3 electoral votes? Keep in mind that in the 2000 election, the election was won by 1 electoral vote. Okay, so you can't let Wyoming go. I think it's worth a stop. But where would you go if you had the Russian system? There was a bank robber, forgotten his name, in the 1930s, and he was kind of infamous. Some of you may know his name. I've slipped my mind for a moment. But they asked him. The reporter said, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Because that's where the money is." Okay. Well, in a so-called national popular vote election, if you got every state to agree, where would you campaign? You'd campaign where the votes are. And where are the votes? They're in Los Angeles. They're in New York. They're in Chicago. That's where you would go. And the hinterland, their votes will be diluted if somehow we can get rid of this terrible electoral college. The Russian election, we'll talk about that one under their system. In 1993, they used a so-called popular vote system, and they had 4 or 5 different parties. The big ones were the Reform Party, and then there was the second one was a blatantly fascist party by Zhirinovsky, headed by Zhirinovsky. And on his platform was to take back Alaska by force, to give you an idea of where they were coming from. Well, the election came down, and the communists in the election got 11%. The Fascist Party got 23%. The Russian Reform Party got 24%. So thankfully for the Russians, they were only required to choose between the Reform Party and the Fascist. But if there had been it came within 2 votes of being required to vote between a fascist and a communist, a hardcore Stalinist or a hardcore fascist. That's exactly the kind of thing that JFK warned us against. Okay, a few comments on the NPVIC. As I said, how do you count popular votes? And if anyone is an advocate of that in our question and answer, I'll ask you. How would you count popular votes for the 3 electors who promised under oath that they would vote for Hillary Clinton and then changed their vote to a vote for a Republican? How would you count popular votes there? For the Republican or for Hillary? The third answer I got, I don't like either. The third answer is ask the newspapers, because the newspapers and the media give this illusion on election night. They have this on the screen. Here's the electoral votes. And then at the bottom, they say popular votes. They are not popular votes. They are not votes for a candidate. How do you count popular votes for an elector slate that's unpledged, as some states do? There's just no way to do it. There's no way to calculate it. And that's why in 1960, the newspapers disagreed. And I hate have an election where you ask the media, how would you count those votes? The Congressional Quarterly in the New York Times at the time said, well, there's 11 electors, 5 voted for for Kennedy, 6 voted for, 5 voted for Kennedy, 6 voted for Byrd. And the Congressional Quarterly said, well, since that slate was elected, you should only count as hypothetical popular votes 5/16 for Kennedy. If you do that, then Nixon won the popular vote. Later, newspapers said, well, we like to think that Kennedy won the popular vote, so we'll just count all of those elector votes for those electors as popular votes for Kennedy. And that way you can say that Kennedy won the popular vote. But that's the media. Why should my response to those who say you want everybody equal, fine. Then you need to start with the U.S. Senate. Every day or many times a year, legislation is passed based on the votes of a state like Wyoming that has equal voice in the Senate with California. that should concern you if you really want to one vote, one equal. You don't want to federal. We've been kind of spoiled because there's usually a pretty large vote in the college, the way it usually works out. Once or twice a century. The so-called hypothetical popular vote doesn't jibe with the so-called electoral vote, and that happens in the parliamentary democracies too. In 1974, for example, in Great Britain, the Conservative Party managed to have a popular vote victory if you counted the number of votes for members of parliament who were of the Conservative Party. But Labour got the most MPs elected. And there was no one who said, let's bring down let's bring down this whole system. This is so undemocratic. So it happens once every couple of 100 years that the hypothetical popular vote doesn't match the electoral vote. And then there's all these accusations, well, it's not legitimate then. Well, I can tell you in England, they didn't think it was illegitimate. That's the way the system works. I'm reminded, if I can use a football analogy, when people are watching the Broncos, and they say, well, our team got the most yardage. They should be the winners. The other team got the points, but that's not a legitimate win. Well, yeah, they might have played the game differently. In the 2016 election, they say, well, when you count the three counties in Southern California that gave Hillary Clinton the so-called popular vote, she should be the winner. Well, change the rules first. Don't change them afterwards. In other words, I don't think Trump even campaigned very much in California and New York. That was a strategy under our present system. So to say that it would have been different, who knows whether it would have been different. Just a closing thought on, and then I'll start taking questions. I'm reading this Proposition 113, and I'm neutral on this. I know it can't actually happen. When I ask the MPVIC people, I say, you say in there it's based on a popular vote, but how would you count the popular votes? Oh, the media would do it, or there'd be litigation or whatever. They know, and they'll confide. At least the ones I've talked to is confide. Our idea is to create a constitutional crisis so that every state will then want to abolish the Electoral College. That's what we want. But the Proposition 113, I don't know who wrote it. It says the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an agreement among participating states to ensure that the presidential candidate who wins the most votes nationwide is elected president. Compact can have I haven't mentioned all the other issues and problems with abolishing the Electoral College. Article 5, I think, is one of the main ones. The interstate commerce, the compact clause of the Constitution says that states cannot conspire or create cabals to enter into agreements. Now, the United States Supreme Court in multi-state tax commission said, well, they can have agreements between themselves with regard to things like water rights and things like that, innocuous things, but undermining or changing the whole federal system, no, that's something that the drafters of the Constitution didn't want. I get the feeling, just like on the Academy Awards, you have that little tune that indicates that time is running out.
We have questions.
Okay. And by the way, if you come over and get your free copy, well, it's not free. You got to get $20 to Rotary, okay, on your honor at some point. And I also have copies of my amicus brief I wrote about 3 months ago to the United States Supreme Court, which was mentioned in oral argument. On the question of Colorado, in accordance good thing. they're elected to change their vote. Yes, so I'm sorry, question, and I will stay as long as anybody can stand it. For this discussion, I understand some people would like to debate, and I love that. So as long as you can stand it, I can stand it until they.
We'll see.
We'll stay until somebody catches us.
Let's give Bob a round of applause. We're going to try this microphone and see if standing right on top of it, we've heard some comments in the chat about audio. So we're going to work on it, and I would encourage everybody after the meeting, you'll get a meeting recap with the survey. Put in your comments. This is obviously our first attempt at this, so anything, feedback you have, love to have it. But I can tell you, it's really fun to be in this room with people. So here's a couple questions, and I will swap back and forth on the mic with Bob. The first question from Brian: can we order Bob's book through the Rotary office? I think the answer is yes.
I provided a link
Oh, there is a link.
in the I can send out a link in the next meeting recap.
All right, we'll send out a link in the next meeting recap for you to do so. Of course, if you're in the room, you can pick it up and do your donation to the Denver Rotary Club Foundation, $20. Next question is from Jill Santuccio. How do we balance voter apathy or the attitude that my vote doesn't count, especially among younger generations, with the Electoral College system, if the latter, in some cases, disregards their state's popular vote?
You may want to follow up because I'm not sure I'm answering your question. One of the criticisms of the Electoral College system is that in some states, known as battleground states, some people say, well, so-and-so is ahead in the polls, so gee, why should I vote? I'm not going to be apathetic. Why am I going to vote? I know my candidate is not going to win. And so then candidates don't necessarily, if they think they have a state locked up like California, New York, they don't bother even campaigning there. It's not a problem. Well, under a popular vote system, you could say that for the whole country. You get a so-called Russian popular vote system, and one candidate is way ahead of the polls. I guess you could say that under that system, people would say, I'm not going to vote. It's not going to make any difference. He's so far behind the polls. He's so far behind the polls. So, you know, every state has the right to determine how they're going to allocate their electoral votes. And that is true. And California could say, we're going to apportion our electoral votes in proportion to the vote. If that had happened, if California had done that in the last election, Trump would have gotten about 40% of the electoral votes. They had a referendum in California. Would you like to do that? And guess what they said? No, we don't want to share our electoral vote. We want to give them all to the candidate who wants. That's up to each state. Some of you may remember a referendum that we had in Colorado a few years ago. They asked us, you want to split our electoral votes based on it? I'm in favor of that because I think that it's pretty close to what the popular vote would be. And that would be a great reform. If states want to do it, they can do it. So far, only Maine and Nebraska have done that. It's actually a district system, not a totally proportional system. So I got off track. I'm sorry.
Are there questions in the room?
Can I add one thing?
You sure can.
You asked if you could get the book. And for me, yes, if you will email me from the office, who would like it? I will get you a digital copy, which is like half price, and or this copy. At Amazon, you can get it for $39, or the ABC Clio, it's a big publishing conglomerate based in Santa Barbara, California. That's the list price is $39. I am so concerned about the disruption that can be caused by some of the things that have been going on with the destruction of the Electoral College. I buy these books and I give them away to anybody who will actually read them. I used to have $5 two reasons. Number one, that's my way of helping Rotary will get. But also, I think it's a thing we don't value anything that's free. So if they will tell you about that they want to vote, I will send them even free if they want.
Right, the other comments that I have in the chat are, what a great presentation, very insightful, excellent presentation. So I'm sure that would be Bob. Any other comments you can send to me via chat, or if there's any in the room again. All right. Go
I
ahead,
know that
Bob.
you had mentioned that somebody, I feel bad that you don't have an EPDS advocate, but apparently there is. Somebody is here who would like to give me not softball questions, but hardball questions. I'm ready for hardball too. It doesn't have to be softball.
Once again, let's give Bob a great show of our appreciation. On the Zoom, I'm going to just describe to you what it is like in the room. So we have these tables set up, which you've seen once, but we can see the Zoom participants on the screen here. Since we have the benefit of seeing Bob live, we get to see all the Zoom faces on our screen, so it's kind of fun. Thank you for your support of this endeavor, this hybrid meeting. In honor of your presentation, Bob, as you know, we Portfolio Plus, and we will donate for 33 children to be inoculated against polio with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation matching contribution to 100 children will be inoculated against polio. So thank you. All right, next week's program, our Bob Kemp, who is our Rotary District Governor for Area 5450, will be speaking to us on People of Action. So again, thank you for your support through this hybrid process. Do fill out the survey, want to hear what you have to say. And then now you'll join me in the Rotary four-way test. Of the things we think, do,
It's true. It's fair to all concerned. For the goodwill, better interests, be beneficial to all concerned.
Thank you again to Warwick for all you did to make this happen. It's really fabulous. And thank you all for being here. And we are adjourned.